Hi, my name is Kristen Fleetstra. I am the owner of Saddlery Solutions, and I've been a saddle fitter for over 22 years now. In this video, I'd like to share a few tips and tricks that could have a huge impact on how your equipment is fitting you and affecting you as a rider. A lot of people don't realize that 9 out of 10 riders here in North America are women, and yet women's pelvises and men's pelvises are built really differently, and so sit in the saddle differently. This is our male pelvis right here, and a couple basic points that I just want to show you are, you can notice that the seat bones are closer together, the pubic symphysis sits higher, and the tailbone comes lower in between the seat bones. So when we put him in the saddle, here, we can see he's got space in front of the bone here. The tailbone is supporting him as a rider, and his seat bones are also cushioned on the seat of the saddle. When we grab our woman rider and put her in that same position, we can see, first of all, let's take a look at her seat bones. They're a little wider apart, the pubic symphysis is lower, and the tailbone sits up much higher. One of the big reasons for this is women have a birthing channel here and men don't, so there's a lot more space between the seat bones. So when we put her in that same spot on the saddle, you can see that this spot here nearly touches the front of the saddle. The tailbone sits up much higher and the seat bones sit closer to the edge of the seat. So the most common issues that we run into with the female rider in the saddle are three things. Number one is feeling like they're getting rubbed in the front. This is by far the most common complaint that I get from women riders, is that when they're posting or sitting in their saddle, is that they're getting contact and pain across the front of the saddle. This is preventable, and it probably means that either the pommel rises too quickly in front of the rider, or that the space in between the thigh is too narrow and they're hanging and balancing on this pubic bone. The other thing that a lot of the time they will feel is pain along this edge of the pelvis right here, because the pelvis is actually falling off the side of the seat instead of sitting in the most cushioned and comfortable part of the seat. So usually when I have a rider that's dealing with pain in the front or getting rubbed in the front, we've either got a saddle that's too small, the pommel rises too quickly, or they don't have enough support on their upper inner thigh. When the saddle is catching them and is painful along the seat bone right there, it usually means that the seat is too narrow and that the seat bone is sitting on the edge of the tree instead of sitting on the most soft and cushioned part of the saddle. One of the most misunderstood and mismeasured portion of our saddle is actually what's called the twist. And the twist is what runs between the upper inner thigh of the rider right across this area of the saddle. And so if you're feeling a saddle that is pushing on the seat bone or the seat, that actually has nothing to do with the twist. It's actually this part of the saddle here that could be causing a problem if it's pushing your inner thighs out. Now again, talking about men versus women, women have a little less space between their upper inner thighs simply because our hamstring runs more to the inside and we carry a little bit more weight on our upper inner thigh, and so there's a little less space there. And so when the twist or that space in the saddle is too wide, it forces the thigh apart, which pushes the knee out and the toe out and forces the rider to ride more this way versus being able to ride straight. So if you're constantly feeling like your knee and your toe is pushed out or there's too much pressure on that upper inner thigh, it probably means that the twist or space here is just too wide for you, and you may need to go to a narrower twisted saddle. Typically, riders who like a saddle that's got a little more width there is women who actually have been dancers, gymnasts, or yoga practitioners. And that's typically because they've got a very loose and flexible hip joint, and so their pelvis actually opens a little bit more in a saddle, versus our typical female rider that drives a car and sits at a desk. And so their hip flexor is shorter and tighter, and they just have a little less space in that upper inner thigh. And so they need something that's just a little narrower there in order to allow the leg to fall flat down the horse and not feel so pulled apart in the saddle. Another thing that I come across in doing saddle fitting is riders feeling like they're either getting tipped forward or falling back in their saddles. And that actually has to do with what we call the cantle, meaning the back part of the saddle right here. So when you've got a saddle that you're feeling like you're tipped forward or you can't get your shoulders back, a lot of the time that means that this is too tall. And so it's catching you from behind and pushing you forward. So if you're constantly feeling like you're tipping forward onto your horse's shoulder, it's a very good possibility that this is too tall and is causing you to be pushed forward. So this saddle, by comparison to the last one we looked at, you can see that the height back here is much lower. So if I had a rider that was constantly feeling like they were falling backwards in their saddle and they didn't have enough support from behind, this wouldn't be the right choice. This is our choice for our rider that feels like they're being pushed forward. So those are two really common issues that we run into with cantle height. If you feel like your saddle is pushing you forward onto your horse's shoulder, that might mean, hey, we need to bring this down a little bit to get you in the center of your saddle. However, if you're constantly feeling like you don't have enough support from the back, then it might be a matter of us needing to bring this up a little bit in order to balance you. This also has a lot to do with how uphill or downhill your horse is and how that saddle is fitting in that regard as well. And so if you're feeling like that balance point for your pelvis just isn't right, it's really worth looking at how you're sitting against the back of your saddle and seeing if you're having too much or too little support from this part. So cantle height isn't just an issue with dressage saddles, it can also be a really big issue with our jump saddles as well. So here's a really great example of a high cantled or deep-seated jump saddle. And so typically the indication that you would get if your jump saddle cantle is too high is that when you're coming down off of a fence, you're feeling like you're hitting the back of the saddle here, or similar to a dressage saddle, like you're feeling constantly tipped forward in the saddle. Those are both really good signs that you've just got a little too much support in the back of your saddle here. So this is a great example of a flatter seated jump saddle, or you could say a jump saddle with a lower cantle. A good indication that this saddle isn't right for you would be feeling like you're constantly left behind over fences, or you feel like you're riding too far back in the saddle. There's a good chance your saddle is too shallow and not enough support from behind. Typically, a more inexperienced jump rider will want a saddle with a little bit more depth to the seat and a little bit more support, whereas a more experienced rider who's jumping bigger fences will want a little bit of a flatter saddle with a slightly lower cantle. If any of the points that we've gone over here sound familiar to you or sound like things that you've been hearing in your lessons, it's probably worthwhile having a saddle fitter come out and just do an assessment for you and see, is this equipment helping you or hurting you? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can find plenty more on our channel, or you can find us at saddlerysolutions.com.